Hi, I'm Anya, and I'm responding to the question, we live in a highly connected world, yet many young people feel isolated and lonely. Why is this such an issue for current society? Are virtual worlds leaving us without real relationships? And I'm going to answer the first two sentences together. There is no doubt that we live in a highly connected world now, whether we want to or not. The little devices which I'm using at the moment to record this very video mean that I can have a window on the world in the palm of my hand and gaze out onto vistas and into lives which beforehand I would have no knowledge of, let alone have any insight into. And yet there is this palpable sense of isolation and loneliness which affects not just young people. It does seem to be the curse of the modern age. A number of writers and journalists have talked about this as being the age of loneliness. And, why is it such an issue for current society? I mean, there are a number of reasons. Current society, even current schooling, is far more about competition as opposed to collaboration and connection. And for some reason the work of John Bowlby, attachment theory, comes into mind, where, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in the 1950s, from the 1930s until the 1950s, he worked with underprivileged children who had mental health issues. And he found that the quality of connection to their primary caregiver very much influenced how they reacted to a particular experiment called the Stranger experiment. And to leave some of the details out, what he found was that the more securely attached a child, and in recent studies a person is to a primary caregiver or has a sense of safety, the more, paradoxically, they feel safe to explore the world. Whereas if you are insecurely attached, you will either dismiss your needs and pretend that you don't need anyone, or you will be incredibly anxious about having those needs met. And if you think about how a lot of us in society these days navigate, not just in real life relationships, but certainly the relationships that we conduct through social media, you can sense this kind of tension playing out, where that people who don't have a sense of safety, don't have a sense of self-acceptance, are more likely to try and seek it from others. And we now have greater opportunity, greater access to an infinite amount of others. And if we denounce and suppress our needs for warmth and connection, we are hardwired for love and belonging. That then in turn is reflected in how we treat others, because we project our distaste for our needs as a distaste onto others and them having needs. And so you come into this vicious cycle where we want to have connection and yet we are terrified of it. And I use the word we in this because I don't feel that this is, while this is perceived as a problem amongst young people, I don't think that it is exclusively to young people. I think, young people, when we are establishing our identity and self-individuating, one of the ways that we do that is to split off from the family group and find other groups and tribes to connect with. However, why is this such an issue in current society? It's because that there are very few ways for us to feel safe now. I mean, I'm a child of the 80s. I remember growing up, before the Berlin Wall came down, with TV dramas talking about, nuclear war, and having that in the background. However, these days, the sense of apocalypse is multidimensional and persistent, constant through the media. You know, we are facing environmental catastrophe, economic fragility at best. Young people today have no sense of progression in their work, in their relationships. Young people, you know, women who are in their 30s or 20s and 30s are considering not having children because financially it's impossible, to do with, you know, certain house prices in metropolitan areas. And so, and when it comes to, you know, family breakdowns, if we don't have a secure roots there, we can find it very difficult to create roots with others. And certainly, you know, we are going to be a rental generation who is longing for love, longing for connection, and yet so terrified of rejection that it becomes an untenable situation. So the final part of the question is, are virtual worlds leaving us without real relationships? I think it is incredibly easy to blame the virtual world, to blame technology for its isolation. It's very much a scapegoat. I think of the internet as a tool. There's a great story that Michael Neal, the coach, talks about somewhere, about, you know, two brothers. You know, they both find a hammer. The first one picks it up and keeps hitting himself in the face with it. And he's in tremendous pain, and when it stops, but he doesn't understand the connection, and he keeps hitting himself in the face with the hammer. You know, the other brother uses the hammer to hits a stone and realises it breaks. And realises that if he keeps breaking all these stones, he can use them to build himself a house. And I think when it comes to technology, when it comes to social media, you know, who amongst us hasn't picked up that hammer and hit herself in the face? Through either reading, you know, terrible news stories, reading misinformation, from checking up on an ex's current whereabouts. But it's also an incredible way to create real relationships. I'm someone who is predominantly housebound, and without social media, my address book, my contact list would have withered away, because I've not been able to socialise in real life. And I've used it as a positive tool. And I think ultimately the place that we need to look to solve this isolation and this loneliness, which particularly affects young people as they try to define themselves, trying to find their tribe in this now predominantly tribal culture, post-truth, the phrase I hate, is to look to ourselves and how and why we have created this society, and how we can use these tools not to keep hitting ourselves and each other in the face, but to build beautiful houses within which we can invite each other to dwell. I've been Anya Pierce. Thank you very much.